Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?
There are already thousands of videos on YouTube that'll tell you An American Werewolf in London is a masterpiece. And of course they're all correct, because it is. I happen to think it's a perfect horror movie, but I'm not going to spend this entire video telling you that, because calling a movie a masterpiece is essentially just expressing your feelings. When it comes to actually analyzing a movie, feelings by themselves are ineffective. And also kind of boring for you as the viewer because it doesn't give you a lot to take away from the video. Listen, I am not here on YouTube to add another harmonious voice to the echo chamber. I am here to take movies apart and put them back together again. Because if you're lucky enough to find a movie you actually think is perfect, the best way to honor it is not to stand around applauding it, is to put some work in and actually understand it. And so, instead of clapping in this video, I'm going to show you why we're still talking about it 45 years later. And, as a bonus, I'm going to walk you through a moment in this film I am rather fond of. It is a tiny, terrible moment that I have never heard anybody else ever talk about. It's not the transformation scene, it is not the brilliant opening sequence on the moors. It's just 3 little words. And I think combined, they make up the scariest moment I have ever seen in a movie. They're so good, in fact, I subconsciously measure every other scary scene against them. Let's go. If you've been here a while, you're probably sick of hearing this, but when I was a kid, the first 2 movies we rented on VHS were The Evil Dead and American Werewolf in London. And I don't mean the first 2 horror movies, I mean the first 2 movies. That weekend is still burned vividly into my memory. It was like heaven for me. I must have watched both of those movies a dozen times each. Back then, I wasn't sure why I loved American Werewolf, I just knew that I did. But since then, after literally hundreds of rewatches, I have figured it out, and it all stems from David Kessler. The movie opens with 2 best friends, David and Jack, backpacking through northern England. They are young, they're American, and they've got absolutely no idea what they're walking into, even though we do. The image is almost too perfect. 2 American boys surrounded by sheep being driven into the English countryside as lambs to the slaughter. And David, the quiet one, the romantic, doesn't see a warning. He just sees an adventure, and that's the tragedy of him. Right from the start, he looks at omens and sees postcards. Jack's more of a class clown who is always pushing boundaries. They argue about girls and their future plans because that is literally all they have to worry about at this stage of their lives. Before we even get to the horror, we feel like we know these guys 3 minutes into the movie. And it's not because they're deeply written characters, it's because their dynamic is instantly recognizable. A lot of us have friendships like theirs. They argue about nothing and they laugh about everything, and it's all effortless. They are not introduced as horror protagonists. They're introduced like it's a buddy comedy. The tone is playful, their back and forth banter is easy, and the stakes are non-existent. John Landis doesn't use the opening minutes to show us how good-looking his cast is or how unbelievably talented they are. He makes you forget you're watching a horror movie at all, which is not sloppy writing, it's strategy. Because you can't have tragedy without first establishing normalcy. The horror only works here because we've been shown what is going to be destroyed. We have seen the futures they are planning, and the girls they argue about, and the lives they both hope to eventually be leading. And that way, when the darkness does eventually rip David apart, we feel every bit of it, because we have just watched him living the dream on vacation with his best friend 3 weeks ago. They end up in a small village called East Proctor, and they walk into the reinforced symbolism of the slaughtered lamb, one of the most perfectly atmospheric pubs in horror history. The locals go quiet, the way locals do in this sort of scenario, but the mood turns strange very quickly when they spot a pentagram on the wall. And of course, the boys laugh it off because these kind of backward traditions are beneath them. They're American tourists. They don't believe in monsters any more than they believe in omens or curses or anything else that hasn't been put onto the tour guide's pamphlet. And after offending the locals to the point of forced ejection, they're given the requisite horror warning.
Stay on the road. Keep clear to the moors.
And in keeping with horror tradition, they don't listen. But the film doesn't make them out to be stupid. They're not defying the villagers, and they're not laughing at superstition and marching boldly into the dark. They just get lost because they're still chatting away and still young and still very much ordinary. The pub is not ominous in a cartoonish way. It is uncomfortable in a very realistic way. And the villagers themselves aren't stereotypical villains. They are a collection of tight-knit people who are collectively hiding a secret they are very ashamed of. And the boys didn't wander out into the moors like idiots. They wandered out into the moors the way you and I probably would have. They're young and they're on holiday. And at their age and in their frame of mind, they still sincerely believe that bad things only happen to other people. But the consequences of their mistake is unlike anything you and I will ever have to deal with. Probably. And it's still one of the most sudden and brutal attacks ever put to film. The attack comes out of nowhere, and it's fast and vicious and terrifying. David's fight-or-flight response is uncharacteristically realistic and honest. He doesn't lift his fist to defend his friend. He doesn't jump onto the beast's back. He runs. But John Landis doesn't portray him as a coward for doing it. He just shows him running for his life, because that is what a real person would have done. This was a very bold decision in 1981. Horror protagonists are meant to be heroes. They are supposed to take 40 punches to the face and grab the rifle and swing the axe and ultimately save the day. David's survival instinct made him run away, and in doing so, he left his best friend alone. And in the chaos, Jack says 3 words. You probably didn't catch them the first time around. You might not have ever caught them. But once you hear them, you'll never unhear them. And when their meaning really settles into your brain, you'll never forget them either. These are Jack's final words, and they're the ones I was talking about earlier. But we're gonna come back to them later. David wakes up in a London hospital and Nurse Alex appears. She is beautiful and smart, and for reasons she probably doesn't fully understand herself, she is drawn to David at his most vulnerable moment. Maybe she sees someone she can save, or maybe she sympathizes with somebody alone in a big city. And suddenly, this movie feels like a genuine romance, and David leans right into it. He smiles and he flirts back because he's really just a young man in denial. He has no idea he's already dead. But the film does. And that's what makes this subplot so cruel. The romance isn't a distraction from the horror, it's a part of it. Nurse Alex represents the life David could have had. She is his normal, happy, potential future. And in storytelling terms, this is pure wickedness. Instead of just leaving David to recover from his injuries in his hospital bed, John Landis dangles hope just beyond the reach of somebody who has no future. And he does it so well that we fall for it too. We let ourselves believe, just for a moment, that maybe this curse isn't real, or that maybe true love is actually going to save him. And that little bit of hope is one of this movie's meanest tricks, because it lets us forget, just like David's forgetting, that his ending has already been written in great big red letters back in the moors. And speaking of wickedness, American Werewolf contains some of the most surreal, unsettling dream sequences ever written into a screenplay. Nazi werewolves invade a family home, and it is worth noting that Landis, a Jewish filmmaker, is populating his heroes' nightmares with images of systemic erasure. David isn't just afraid of dying, he's afraid of being replaced and having his identity taken over by something that wears his face but is not him. It's the dream logic of a young Jewish man who knows, on some subconscious level, what it means to have your humanity stripped away. Landis is treating David's subconscious like its own horror movie, and if you pay attention to the dreams, they're actually revealing the truth. They're showing us exactly what David can't accept while he's awake. He's already becoming a monster, his body is being taken from him, as is Alex, and the dreams are just the reality his conscious mind keeps rejecting. Now, obviously, we can't talk about this movie without discussing the scene that everybody always talks about, myself included. Rick Baker's practical effects literally changed the industry. The grinding and the stretching and the mutation is still one of the most visceral, physical, painful-looking pieces of practical effects artistry ever.
It's also the moment David's disappearance becomes physical. His body is no longer his own. He is being replaced from the inside out, so the pain isn't just physical, it's existential, because he is watching himself be erased.
But it's only part of why this movie has stayed with me as long as it has. For me, the true horror of this film happened back here in the moors. And here is where David's through line gets its cruelest twist. He survived, but he survived by leaving Jack behind. And this movie never lets him forget that.
When Jack's ghost appears later, rotting and accusatory, he's not just a supernatural haunting. He's David's guilt manifesting. But the guilt starts here, in this moment, because David hears these words. He's running away, but he hears them, and he will carry them with him for the rest of his short, cursed life.
I want you to listen to the last thing Jack says. Amidst all the unimaginable chaos of his final moments, listen to his last 3 words.
They've got me! Jack!
It's not help me, it's not don't leave me, it's not even a scream. He declares a fact. Jack has realized his friend abandoned him and that he is dying.
Most horror movies are a lie, a comforting lie. The monster's real, but so is the prospect of escape. There is a killer coming, but he's coming after a final girl. There is a curse, but there's a ritual to break the curse.
A horror movie's job is to terrify us, but it's also to reassure us in equal measure. Horror shows us the world is full of terrible things, but they assure us there's a way out too. The villain has a weakness, or the hero will always come over the hill on his horse at the last minute.
This moment is not that. Jack isn't praying for help because he knows David has run away. He's not praying, he's not even swearing. He is just making the final observation there is to make, and he is stating it in a way you would state an observation about something happening to someone else. Except it's not happening to someone else this time, it's happening to him, and he knows it.
And that is the whole horror. He's not transitioning from hope to despair. He is already on the other side of it. He's past fear. He is beyond the animal part of the brain that screams and fights and defends itself. He's just accepting his own death.
That is existential horror written more plainly than you will ever see it done. It is beyond the fear of pain and the fear of the monster. It's even beyond the fear of death itself. It is the actual conscious and irreversible understanding and acceptance of the fact you are going to die right now.
Most of us never have to face that. We get to die quickly, or in our sleep, or surrounded by our loved ones. Or at the very least, we get to die without the full conscious understanding that it's happening. It's very easy to forget these aren't soldiers. They aren't even hardened men. They're not long out of high school. Up until now, the most traumatic thing either of them had probably ever dealt with was being turned down by a girl. This was Jack's first real trauma, and it was his last.
And he was given exactly 1 instant to fully understand everything he believed his entire life was not true. Youth does not protect you. Your friends will abandon you. Death is not just for other people, or for old people, or for sick people, or for people fighting in Ukraine.
And normally, death doesn't happen to people like Jack, who is backpacking with his best friend and arguing about a girl named Debbie Klein. Except it just did. This film doesn't look away from that horrible real-life truth, and it doesn't let Jack look away from it either. For 1 terrible second, Jack understood the most awful thing. And that is what stayed in my head all of these years. By the final act, David is already gone. Jack's ghost has become a companion, not just a horrible reminder. The undead victims in the cinema are played for laughs, but there's a real sadness underneath them. Dr. Hirsch is fighting desperately to save a patient from something he doesn't even believe in as a man of medicine and logic. David loses Alex, he loses himself, and he loses his future. The wolf isn't the tragedy. The tragedy is that David was erased long before the beast took over. And what erased him? It wasn't the bite, it was his guilt. The memory of Jack's final words kept gnawing at his soul, the way the wolf gnawed at his body. And then we get the ending. The beast is shot, and it falls, but for half a second before it's shot, its eyes soften. Or did they?
We want him to still be in there. We need him to still be in there because the alternative prospect is almost unbearable to think about. If David was gone before that bullet even hit, this movie offers us nothing in the way of catharsis. Alex loses the man she just fell in love with in the worst way imaginable. Jack dies alone in a cold, dark, wet field, and David dies surrounded by trash bags and police officers, completely unredeemed. That version of the movie would be impossible to sit with. And that is exactly why this film has endured. American Werewolf is not offering us comfort, it is offering us grief. And grief, unlike any jump scare, does not fade when the credits start to roll. Not even 45 years later.
45 years later, an American Werewolf in London is still the benchmark because it has everything. There's craft and tone and atmosphere and laughter and heartbreak and fear and shock. And at the center of it all, the thing that brings all these elements together is David Kessler, a young man who went on holiday with his best friend and never came home. That's why we're still watching, and that's why, all these years later, I still can't shake those three little words.
Stay on the road. Keep clear of the moors. And until next time, folks.
Who's afraid of the big bad wolf?